welcome to the Understanding Projects podcast. My discussion today is with Sheila Chu. Sheila is an accomplished project manager specializing in the full integration of new acquisitions and amalgamations into her company's infrastructure, application systems, and business processes. She also holds a number of project management certifications, including the PMP and Agile Scrum Master designations. She is also an active member of the PMI Lakeshore Ontario chapter, where she has held a number of leadership positions and won a number of chapter awards. During our discussion, we talked about her approach to creating project schedules, software tools she has used, the scheduling challenges she has encountered, and approaches she has taken to solve these challenges. Here is my discussion with Sheila Chu. Many people that I talk to when I'm talking to people about project management and so on, a lot of people seem to equate project management with schedules. Like it's almost like they're equal. That is that the schedule is managing the project. And so how do you view the project schedule? Do you see it as that is the central piece of it, or do you just view it as sort of one piece of the project?
That's a good question, Dave, because a project, the definition of a project is that it has to have a start and an end date. So I can see why some people may correlate the scheduling with project very closely, because that's really what the project term means. You've got to have a start and an end date. There's no such thing as an indefinite end date. It's not a project if that's the case.
Right. Right. That's true. That is like you say, the basic definition is start and end. So therefore, by definition, it has to have some sort of timing. In your experience and in the projects you've been on, what sort of schedules have you been involved in or created? Like, have you been, um, you know, created like extensive schedules or high level schedules? What sort of tools have you used? Like what sort of schedules have you created?
So when I started as a project manager, and of course, usually your manager would give you something a little bit simpler, to start you with, and then as you gain that experience, you become more comfortable with running a project, and then they normally would give you a little bit more complex until such time where you've reached maybe a senior project manager role, where now we're talking about a very complex project with big budgets and high visibility, things like that. As far as tools are concerned, uh, I'm just going to talk about what we usually use at work, with the company I work for. So one of the tools we've often used is Smartsheet. It might be something that a lot of people may be familiar with now. Unfortunately, I'm not too well versed with MS Project per se, because it requires a license first of all, and when you want to share the project plan with someone, that someone must have a license as well to be able to view it. Whereas with Smartsheet, if you don't have if you don't have a license for Smartsheet, but I do, I can still share it with you, and you're still able to view it. So you may not be able to edit it, but you can certainly view the project plan. So that's one of the benefits of using Smartsheet over MS Project. Now, bear in mind, I'm also talking about MS Project back in the day when we were using it. I don't know if MS Project has evolved over time, because, of course, there's a lot of other very good project management tools out there, Smartsheet being one of them. Also, with Smartsheet, there are other features that you normally would see in MS Project. They have it as well, like Gantt chart. You can assign it to a person. You can put the start date, end date. It pretty much looks like an MS project, except that it's a little bit smarter, hence
Right.
smart sheet.
Right.
And the good thing also with the smart sheet is because you can download it into a project plan, into an Excel sheet, or link it to your Google account if you're using Google.
Right.
The other one that we've used at work is a tool called ServiceNow, a little bit similar to Smartsheet in that sense, but also it gives you this one feature that I actually like. It's resource planning. So if as you're recruiting resources into your project, you can actually put it in there, and it even allows you to once you enter the person's name, it sends an email notification to the person's manager to approve that you've recruited this person as a resource in your project, and what's the percentage of of capacity
Right.
for this project. So that's a good feature that ServiceNow has.
Right.
If we
Okay.
talk
So
about,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
those are a couple of good tools. What do you see as the challenge? Like we've talked about Smartsheet,
Mhm,
MS Project, and the other tool that you mentioned.
mhm,
But what do you see as the challenges when you're about to start a project and you've got the scope is being developed and so on? You've got your Smartsheet, say, window open on your PC. What do you
mhm.
see as the challenges when you're creating that schedule? How do you
That's a good question.
approach that?
That's a good question. Right off the bat, I can think of three challenges that I would regularly come up with or come across as a project manager. The first one is the inaccurate estimate of effort. Say you've got a project and you've got resources, you ask your developers if developers are involved. Let's just say there are developers, you ask them for an estimate of effort. Sometimes, and we all know this as project managers, that sometimes developers like to put a little bit of buffer in there. I can understand why, because they can sometimes not predict or forecast what could happen along the way as they're developing this new tool. So it's understandable they put a bit of a buffer there, but also the lack of the providing an estimate of effort is a challenge for project managers. You're asking them to provide the estimate of effort and it's just not coming in. How do you even schedule? How do you even begin to plan the project without even an estimate of effort, right? So that's one of the challenges that a project manager encounters regularly. Another challenge that I've come across is the lack of resource or dedicated to this project, for example, or the um, the capacity of a resource is not enough to being to make this project work and complete in a timely manner. And of course, when you say there's a lack of resource, because they're pulled left, right, and center with different projects as well, it could lead to bottlenecks, and then your critical path turns into red. So, red flags right there.
Right.
Yeah. A third one, which unfortunately can happen also, is lack of support from your project sponsors and your key stakeholders. That I believe is a big deal. If you don't have the proper support from your project sponsors and key stakeholders, it's hard to manage and complete the project. Just because decisions need to be made, and if it's not coming in fast enough, you know um, resources need to be assigned and dedicated to project manage to the project, and if that's not happening, there goes your project plan down the drain.
Yes. So so much to unpack there that you just described, and I agree with all three of those. But let me just go back to the first one. Inaccurate estimates, and I can't agree more. And it's interesting. I was just teaching a class today, and we were talking about this exact thing, about the challenge of estimating. How do you how do you create an estimate if you've maybe never done it before, or it's something new, or it's something different, and on top of that, you're getting estimates from, you were mentioning developers, of, well, and they might be padding it, they might be in, like, maybe they're building something in, and they're not telling you, and so on. And so, like, I'm kind of going, what do you do with that? Like, what have been your strategies? Have you tried to sort of add your own little budget, like, pad to it, or do you question people more? Or what do you do about that? Like, what's been your go-to on that?
So I'll tell you one personal experience I had. This is back in the day when I was an inexperienced project manager myself. Starting out, wanting to impress my managers as well. Making sure that I'm doing the right thing, thinking I'm doing the right thing as well. So anyway, I had the estimate from our developers, and I look at it and I said, "Wow, 8 weeks." Really? Do you really need? I'm thinking to myself, really? Do you really need 8 weeks? So when my manager came to me and asked, okay, how's it going with the project planning? I said, well, they gave me an estimate of 8 weeks, but I doubt they need 8 weeks. I'm sure they buffered it. So first of all, right there, the red flag, as I know now, being an experienced manager myself, is there is the lack of trust to accept your developer's estimate, which is a big, right off the bat, it's a big problem. You don't trust your team. How's it gonna work, right? And then also there is a lack of support within the team. So what I've learned over the years is that I need to make sure that I work well with my team. I need to make them feel that I'm supporting them, because they in turn will support me as a project manager tenfold. So I need to, first of all, accept what they have presented to me, but that doesn't mean that we'll take it for granted. We can certainly ask our questions. Why do you think you need 8 weeks? Is there a concern there? Is there a risk there? And they'll let you know. They're the experts, right? You don't know every aspect and every expertise, so you rely on your resources to provide you with information, this important information, to make the sound decision, in making your project, in completing your project plan.
Yeah.
So
I love the fact that you use the word trust there, because I can't agree more that if you prior to this point of the estimate discussion, if you've had lots of discussions and they trust you, and there's respectful relationship between the PM and the developers, then there's more likely to be honesty, that goes back and forth of saying, yeah,
absolutely.
maybe it'll take 4 weeks in best case, but it might take 6 or 7 weeks. And they're trusting the project manager not to just jump in and cut them off and say, okay, you said 4 weeks, we're in, like, or they're trusting them. So that's the importance of that relationship building, and that the way you interact with your team is so important. So that's really good. And what I've always found is that estimating is such an inexact science. It's a an interpersonal sort of relationship of everybody involved to try to figure this out. The second one, you involve resources. That's the age-old problem, right? I remember being involved in projects where every project we go into a meeting and we look at the risks, and every time it was, we don't have enough resources, and it was like, yes, we don't have enough resources. We get that, but it's the age-old problem, um, and um, and yeah, that's what. And again, what do we do about that with scheduling? Like, how do we address that? And just do we just account for it and just say, well, you know what, we got to add a little extra in our schedule. We have to just add that little buffer to address the lack of resources.
See, the resource capacity and the and the estimate of effort comes hand in hand. So as a resource, they already know that they only have 50% capacity to this project, because the other 50% is with the second project that they're also working on. So they've already figured out how much time they can allocate only for this project, and in turn, that's how they would estimate their effort. Now, of course, the challenge there would be, once again, the lack of experience from the resource himself or herself, because he or she might be new at this, not realizing that, he's shooting himself or herself, right, by being overly confident. So that could be that's a tricky part. Yeah, there could be an inexperience thrown in there. The second one could be a pressure also from upper management, where they might say, okay, I don't care what projects you have on hand right now. This is the priority, and this becomes the priority. So now we're talking about all hands on deck. What do you do with that? There'll be a lot of grumblings, of course. And guess what? Your project will fall behind because the other project becomes a priority. So it's always a struggle. And I agree with you, Dave. You mentioned earlier, it's always a challenge. And once again, you have to build that relationship with the resource and the resources manager, because ultimately it's the manager who will try to allocate where his people are going, which projects, right? So building that relationship also helps with the manager, with the person's manager. um,
Right.
if you're lucky, you could get dibs.
I've always kind of felt the person you really want to get to know is the resource manager. That is someone you want to get to know, and you certainly don't want to tick them off in any way, because that's
That's
not
true.
helpful for your project. That's a relationship you certainly want to build. One of the things that I've found that students often struggle with is how much detail to put in a schedule. Like if you're creating activities, do you schedule down to, like small little granular amounts, like every couple of hours or every half day, or do you do big sort of, larger activities? Like what is the right level of detail? And I know that's a hard question, because there's depends on the project perhaps, but how do you assess that? What's your view on that?
So it really depends on who you're talking to, who you're giving that the project plan to. If you're talking to the steering committee, the project sponsor, senior management, they don't want the nitty gritty details. They just want the high level detail.
Right.
When you're talking to uh, the operating committee, these are the people who are usually the resources managers, the people who are in operations, using using the tool, for example, and they are the ones who usually would make the operating decisions of the project. So you want a little bit more detail, but not too much either. But there should be enough detail, so mid level detail, for them to make a sound judgment. Now, when you're talking to your project resource, your core team, you have to be very detailed. Every little task needs to be accounted for because it's part of the scheduling. You have to make sure you're allocating uh, time for even just say giving someone access, a fellow resource access to this so that they can do their work. Those have to be accounted for because you're
Right.
still using time, right?
Yeah.
So no questions will be unanswered and should not be unanswered
Yeah.
when you're dealing with your project resources or core team.
Right.
I would say in a project plan, it will be a very detailed plan, and then as you move up the committee level, you just kind of pick the the high level and the mid level according
Right.
to who you're talking to.
Yeah, you don't want to go into you don't want to go into a presentation with an executive and show them the nitty gritty. Their eyes will glaze over very quickly. Um,
Absolutely.
um, how often do you find, like on your average project that you're working on, how often do you update the schedule? Are you in there every day, every week, every month? Like what do you find like in terms of your schedule?
So if we're talking about how often do we need to update the start date and the end date of say tasks or more, ideally you don't want to update anything for, as soon as you start the project all the way to finish, because that means your project is running smoothly. However, in reality, that's really not the case, you know. So you constantly have to review the project plan, look at the task that's coming up due, making sure that your resources are aware of the tasks that are due very soon, you know. um, you want to make sure of uh, you want to make sure that everybody in your team, your core team especially, is aligned with the deadlines that are coming up, because every every task that are due is linked to the next task, or most likely is. You know, some are on the critical path and some may not be. So with the critical path, those are the ones you really want to watch very closely, and making sure it's being updated regularly.
Right.
When we say updated also, the status is needs to be updated. Is it completed, delayed, in progress, not applicable, type of thing? Those need to be updated as well, so that your resources know what's next in line.
Right. Right. Do you like in your schedules, do you actually calculate the critical path and publish it? Is that a known thing in your projects and your project teams, or is it more just sort of there's sort of rough like awareness of it? Like how formal is your critical path calculations?
I wouldn't say in the real world, at least in my experience, it's not it's not calculated per se, but it's actually flagged as, you know, this is a critical path, because if we don't do this task, the next one is dependent on it. You can't even start,
Right.
that type of thing. But to do the math, I know in theory we do the math, right? There are numbers involved in addition and subtraction. We don't exactly do that in real in the real world, but definitely they're flagged as
Yeah.
a critical path.
And I think that's very common. I when I talk about critical path, I talk about that. Yes, it is a theory. There is a calculation. MS Project, and I'm sure Smartsheet and others will actually show you the critical path if you get all your dependencies input. But it is, in my mind, almost more of a mindset that you become aware of those activities, those tasks in your projects that if they delay, you're going to push your project out. Like you become known without even having to do the math and like do the calculations. You know that, you know what, if we don't get this part ordered or this software program tested, it's going to delay things. And so therefore it's critical. It's on the critical path. So it becomes more of a concept than an
Right.
exact number, you know.
Absolutely.
So to me, I think that's very, very common. Um, have you found that do you use your schedule and actually put in the days that people work on it actually into your schedule, or is that somewhere else? Like, or do you just update the percentage complete on the tasks themselves, or do you actually say that, hey, you know, Mary worked 3.5 days on this activity and let the schedule figure that out in terms of the costing and so on?
I actually don't do that myself. However, if you're dealing with contractors, you would likely have to do that. Most of my resources are paid 8 hours a day.
Right.
So it eliminates the necessity for me to actually count, okay, how many days did you put here and then how many days there. I personally don't do that as well. I feel like it's a bit of a micromanagement.
Yeah,
in
for
my
sure.
opinion.
For sure.
I just trust my team to do their job. You know what your deadline is for which task. I expect to hear something. Now, I also remind my team that if you feel that you will not be able to meet your deadline for whatever reason, raise it right away. Don't wait till the last hour, because there's nothing we can do about it when you've raised it at the last hour. But if you raise it early as a potential risk, I may be able to help you. So let's help each other out so that we don't run into a major disaster in the end. That's how I usually run my project and the team that I run.
Yeah, no, I think that's what you're describing is what I've seen as well in many instances where oftentimes the software programs, MS Project, and I'm sure Smartsheet as well, they have capabilities of being able to log time and calculate this and so on. So that is all there oftentimes in organizations, unless, like you say, if it's a external contractor where you're actually logging hours and so on. But if it's an internal team, um, there is a indication of, okay, they're dedicated to the project, or they're giving
Yeah.
me 50% of their time. So that almost is outside of the software that
Yeah.
is managed elsewhere. So that there's
Yes.
lots of human interface there.
Right. And even in Smartsheet, there is a feature for you to uh, turn on the percentage complete for each task, assigned to a resource. But I don't normally turn it on. It's a little distracting for me. I just go by the due date. This is however you want to do it, just do it. As long as we are on time, I'm happy with it.
Right. So
I do know that some of my colleagues like to use the percentage. I personally am not a big fan of it.
interesting. So you're finding that's an interesting one. So you're finding that you're more on a, let's just, if it's done, once it's done, as opposed to saying, okay, are you 65% done or 70? You don't like the percentage complete. You just like, okay, when it's, if you're not going to make the due date, let me know. And otherwise we're on the due date.
I'm more of that type of project manager.
Yeah, interesting. That's and it's really kind of highlighting that there's a lot of personal preference as to which way to go on that. Like some, like you're saying, some PMs will want to say, okay, I want to track the percentage, and so I'll meet with the team members and talk about the percentage complete, which brings with it all kinds of issues, right? Because oftentimes people get quickly to 90%, and then that last 10% takes half of the time. Like that last 10% can take forever to get
And
done.
that's very true, Dave. I also found that the percentage is quite subjective anyway. You could put 50% if you want, and
Right.
what's 50%? Your 50% may not be my 50%. So I didn't really see the value in there.
Right.
So that's why I tend to shy away from it.
That's really interesting, because you're right. 50%. What does it even 50% mean? Does it mean we've used up 50% of the time? It was a 10-day task. So okay, we've used 5 days. Is that 50%? Is it 50% of the work has been done?
Exactly.
Is it, I think,
Exactly.
like it's such an inexact science.
Yes, it's true. You've used up 50% of the time because it's 10 days, so you've used up 5 days. But really, was there 50% of the work done in actual? I don't know. Maybe not, right? It, so to me, as long as the deadline is met on or before, I'm happy.
Right. So maybe the better conversation to have when you're, say, talking to your team members at that point, like let's say it's a weekly review, or that sort of thing, the reporting back, is the more interesting discussion is more, are you in a position to make that date versus trying to come up with this magical percentage?
Exactly. That's exactly the question I asked them.
Right.
Will you make it to your deadline? Do you
Right.
see any roadblocks there? Do you see any potential risk that we might need to raise now? Raise it now. That's
Yeah.
always what I ask each of my resource whenever we have our weekly meeting.
Yeah. No,
Now with
that's
sorry,
interesting.
yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if it's agile, then we meet every day in the morning, so it's even a bigger and a faster turnover, because the sprint is usually 1 or 2 weeks only. So every day they have to be able to say what they've accomplished, what they're doing next, and are they behind or not. So it's even faster to determine whether they're on time or on track or not even.
Right. Right. Yeah. So that's interesting. There are methodologies that I've seen that have talked about, you just it's either 0 or 100%. Don't try to, and that's what you're saying. So it's quite interesting. I think I think which would be important is not to have tasks that are too long. Then if there's a 3-month task, to go from 0 to 100% is difficult. Like, so you probably want to keep your timelines, your task durations a little bit shorter than that.
Yes, that's right. If the task, as you said, if the task is calculated to 3 months, you probably should break it down even further into
Right.
smaller tasks so that you can monitor it a little bit better, because 3 months is a long time
Yeah.
for one task, for example. So I would definitely break it down into several tasks so that it's easier to track what we've accomplished in, say, a period of a week, and what we haven't completed, and so on.
Great. One last question. There's been a great discussion on scheduling, Sheila. One last question. If somebody was about to start as a PM and was starting to think about scheduling, what would you say to them? What would be your advice to say, you know, hey, Sheila, I'm going to start as a PM. What should you tell me about scheduling? What would be your piece of advice?
I would say always look for an experienced project manager to guide you. A mentor is really important for an up and coming project manager. There's no better uh, experience and knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing that you can have than having a mentor to help you along the way.
Excellent. Great advice. And you've already in this conversation given all kinds of advice too. So I thank you for that. So anyways, thank you very much for this great discussion. Sheila, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave, for having me. It was a great opportunity, and I'm happy to help wherever I can.
Thanks for listening to my discussion with Sheila Chu. During our discussion, Sheila talked about the many real world aspects of project scheduling. Her perspective should be helpful for those looking to create effective project schedules. If you like this series of discussions, please consider following Understanding Projects on your favorite podcast player or clicking subscribe on YouTube.